Hi and welcome to the Huddle Breakdown Extra Time. I'm your host Martin Murphy and I'm joined as ever by James and by Alan. We'll be doing a deep dive into the data and analysis of our Champions League match in Dortmund. So one for the watershed, I would suspect, folks. Send the kids to bed. How are you guys? Are you feeling wunderbar?
It's Oktoberfest soon, isn't it?
They felt like it was Oktoberfest last night, yeah, Tuesday night.
Oh man, yeah, I feel like it's nearly Halloween actually, so I think like it's more opposite.
Absolute horror.
Some of the analogies that'll be coming out, yeah.
Well, just one final analogy from me before we get into it, really. Watching that first half especially, it took me back many years. It made me think of watching the Champ with John Voight. You know, I was like a young Ricky Schroeder. Yo, Champ, he's getting pulverised. Like, make it stop, don't die, Champ. And it transported me back to a 12-year-old me there. It was had a dreadful impact on me. But guys, we'll start getting into it because there's an awful lot to discuss. If I could just very quickly summarise a few points very quickly, as I say. My point of view, and see what you've come up with in terms of the data and the analysis. I thought we looked incredibly naive in that match, both tactically and individually. I was shocked by how passive we were. I thought the press didn't work. We didn't seem to have the same urgency in the press, which I thought was going to be absolutely vital for us. Nor did we use the pace that we had up front, which I thought was going to be a big strength for us against a Dortmund team who are in transition, who haven't been doing tremendously well in the league so far, who have been finding their feet. I thought that would give us a few opportunities, and indeed, I suppose it did, but nowhere near what I thought. I thought that the passing was poor, lots of gaps in the pitch, especially through the centre. Yeah, I really just thought we didn't play to our strengths in many ways. If I could come to you first, Alan, one of the things that seems to be coming up by many Celtic fans is looking at how Brendan Rodgers set the team up tactically, and especially after the match, there didn't seem to be any sense of we may be doing things differently when we play Atalanta later in the month. What was your take on it, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, remember, I sit and watch the whole game back in like second by second detail. I had to sit and watch that whole game deep into that darkness peering. Long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, drowning dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. So listen, I thought the first 10 minutes were a bit dodgy, but after that it was all right, wasn't it?
I thought we grew into the game.
We grew into it. It was all right. Listen, if you hear about individual errors eviscerate individuals, then you're going to be disappointed. This was a fundamental tactical disaster. Absolutely fundamentally, Celtic got the whole game plan wrong and compounded by bad execution, actually. But when you set up in such a disappointing way relative to the strengths of the opponent, then I've never seen a Celtic team actually, and we've covered a few of these now. PSG and Barcelona and Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid. I've never seen the team set up to fail as badly as was the case in this match. And we'll come to a little bit later, some of the kind of statistical evidence for why, whisper it, Dortmund didn't even have to be that good to score 7 goals, yep. Right? So listen, I wrote a piece on the Celtic way. I mean, please, it's pennies a week to subscribe. It's an in-depth piece. There's lots of diagrams and squiggly lines and so forth. I just kind of want to walk through that because really, even normally we analyse a match. There's no need to analyse the match beyond around the 35th-ish minute of this game because the game's done. I mean, there's all that you were doing after that was accumulating statistics, right? Literally, there was no worth to it. Okay, if you're if you're Alex Valle, yeah, probably I'd respectfully disagree with that. Rio Hatate was shiny in the second half and did well, etc. But in the main, as a performance as a team, the game was done pretty much by the 38th minute. So for me, it was from the start really. Well, apart from I think we won a throw in and a corner. That was jolly good.
But we got two corners in the first few minutes, didn't we? And that was about it. Yeah.
In the fourth minute, they actually clear a ball up the field, and Austin Trusty, and again, no individual. I'm not going to blame any particular individual. This is just being factual here. This is how Trusty has been asked to defend, and Scales. There are other examples with Scales as well. Austin Trusty goes 20 yards inside Dortmund's half, right on the touchline to win a headed duel. And that's how Celtic play. That is generally how Celtic play. The central defenders are high, obviously, and they're very front foot. So they'll track any of the attackers into their own territory if they need to. And this is what happened. As Trusty wins the ball, behind him, so this is on the halfway line, there's Julian Brandt, there's Adeyemi, and there is Guirassy. And for Celtic, there's Scales and there's Taylor. But it's okay because, Trusty does a good job of winning the header very cleanly. Unfortunately, the ball goes straight to Pascal Gross, who, probably surprisingly, and, if you'd scouted Dortmund, this would never have occurred to you, that Pascal Gross was then capable of playing a 30-yard pass first time without breaking sweat, or even controlling the ball, into the feet of Adeyemi. And at that point, you're then faced. If I was to be a defence, if I was to use James's parlance, if I'm defensive coach for this team, right, and I'm doing my pre-game spiel as part of Rodgers' management team, what are some of the things that you would make sure that the team is set up to avoid? Well, number one would be having Adeyemi at the ball at his feet with the fullback in front of him and wide open spaces behind him. Secondly, I wouldn't want any of our defenders to be left one-on-one with any of their attackers because they're all really quick and they're all really good in terms of technical ability. Julian Brandt might not be the quickest, but this guy, for the last 10 years in the Bundesliga, has almost got 10 goals, 10 assists, played over 30 games every year, bang, 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 right? He's got 47 caps for Germany. You just wouldn't want to be in that situation. So already, after 4 minutes, you've engineered a situation where you've got Adeyemi running at Greg Taylor with the whole of the pitch in front of him to run into. It's just the worst nightmare that I imagined having watched that Dortmund team about twice, right? They didn't score from that particular breakaway. But then in the 11th minute, and, so basically this is a minute after Celtic have scored, we initiate a press. It's a decent press, but, we're a little bit stunned that Dortmund's £20 million centre-backs and their very good goalkeeper were able to be press-resistant. And the ball ends up at Kobel's feet, who's the goalkeeper. And as he looks up, he sees on the halfway line, there isn't a single player from Celtic in the Celtic half. Not a single one, okay? And each of the four defenders, apart from Trusty, so the other three are man-marking one player, and Trusty's shadowing Brandt. Brandt is on his own in absolutely 20 yards of space all round him, because McGregor is 20 yards in front of him, doing nothing. He's not pressing, and he's not marking. And who would have thought that, a goalkeeper, the quality of Kobel, could launch a ball 50 yards to halfway, and the £20 million striker would be capable of controlling the ball and executing a pass. I mean, it would never occur to me watching a team like Dortmund that risk was going to occur. Not only did Guirassy manage to lay the ball off to Brandt, he did it in such a way that suddenly Brandt, Adeyemi and Gittins are now running at the Celtic defence 3 versus 3 on the halfway line with the whole pitch in front of them. This is the worst nightmare I could ever imagine facing this Dortmund team. It's the last thing you should ever want when you're playing against this specific team and those specific players. What does Brandt do? He plays in a really cute ball through down the middle, Adeyemi, Trusty does a good job actually matching Adeyemi for pace. And Adeyemi runs on, and guess what happens when you perform in a way that Celtic did today? You don't get any luck. It's funny how that always happens, isn't it? Trusty does a good job. He tracks his man. He even blocks the shot. He blocks the shot so well it flies into the top corner, right? But in this case, this isn't a sob story, right? You get the luck that you deserve. Now, this is all within the context of having just equalised, right? Where do we even talk about game management? It doesn't get any better. We're 16 minutes in now. We're 2-1 down. And actually, Celtic are in a position for which, from a pressing perspective, is pretty promising. And I'll be honest with you, I'm happy that Maeda's pressing. He's managed to actually pin the Anton, the centre-back, right on the right-back position, right against the touchline. It's perfect, pressing situation for Celtic. But again, astonishingly, the €20 million centre-back is able to not only brush off Maeda, but keep control of the ball as it bobbles along the touchline, get his head up, and pass the ball to, checking my notes here, Adeyemi. Now, if I'm scouting Dortmund and making a report for Brendan Rodgers, I'm going, whatever you do, keep the ball away from Adeyemi. He is lightning. He looks like the cross between Mo Salah and Arjen Robben. You don't want the ball to go near him, and especially not when there's got the whole pitch in front of him. Guess what? He gets the ball on the turn, on the halfway line. There are four Dortmund players now who are just on or inside Celtic's half, and there are 3 Celtic defenders. Taylor's out the game. Scales is trying to get to Adeyemi. Trusty is shadowing Girassi, and Gittins is about 20 yards the other side of Johnson. Meanwhile, Brandt just wanders into the huge gap that is in the middle of the pitch because McGregor somehow is on the left-hand side of the pitch. So when Adeyemi remarkably is able to execute a square 15-yard pass in midfield under no pressure, Brandt has got the whole field in front of him. He's got Gittins running one side, he's got Girassi running the other, and he's got 2 Celtic players running towards their own goal with 3 players to mark. Now, they butcher it because Gittins goes literally a fraction offside. But this is just the worst nightmare, revisited again and again and again. We bounce forward now 2 minutes to the 18th minute. Now, this is one where there is a bit of an individual error to start things up.
Stop! No mas! No mas!
I'm having flashbacks like the deer hunters here. I'm reliving this match minute by minute.
We're doing it. We're doing this. It has to be done. It has to be done, right? So Alistair Johnson, he plays a ridiculous pass. He lobs the ball from the edge of his own box into the centre of the pitch, where there is nobody. There's literally no Dortmund players. There are no Celtic players. And then Bernardo has to go into an aerial duel with Adeyemi. Oh, who would have thought? He actually loses the duel, but it's fine because Adeyemi heads the ball right back towards the halfway line to his own defender. So we're all good. The panic's over. No. So again, the £20 million centre-back doesn't skip a beat. He just walks onto the ball and heads it right over the whole Celtic midfield to the edge of the box to where Julian Brandt is, surprisingly, only 10 yards behind Callum McGregor this time. And as Brandt, because he's a decent player, is able to turn and feed the ball and then face the Celtic goal, we have 4 players versus 3, again, on the edge of the Celtic box. Now, this is the one that Pascal Gross absolutely butchers, but when he's fed in by Brandt and he tries to cross the ball. But that was just, again, an incredible situation to be put in. And we now go on to the 28th minute. And again, if I'm watching this team, what am I saying? Don't let Brandt get on the ball. And if you do, make sure that someone's right up his arse when he gets it. Don't let him turn. You do not let Adeyemi and Gittins have the ball running at you unless you've got cover from your midfield and you've pushed them at least wide. And the other thing is they play long diagonals all the time. Gross and Chan sit in central midfield like quarterbacks and lob the ball out to the wide.
And have done all season.
And literally have done all that season. So when Gross picks the ball up on his kind of left back position, virtually the whole Celtic team is pushed over to the right-hand side, but the midfield is really, really high once again. But they're not doing anything. They're not pressing anybody, and they're not marking anybody, right? And there's this amazing, it's just amazing image that I have, a little bit of play I didn't even pick up on the day, where as Gross looks to ping this 50-yard diagonal to his right back, Taylor starts to panic and runs towards the fullback that he's about to receive the ball. Scales runs the completely opposite direction towards Girassi, who's who's dropped deep on the off chance, and Trusty sort of goes that way diagonally towards goal. It was like that famous photograph of Davy Weir, I think, when Scott Brown breaks into the box and he's like this and he's completely looking in the wrong direction. This was like a team version. A version of that. Now, Celtic actually cleared that ball. I think Greg Taylor got a clearance in. But it went all the way back to Emre Can, who was sitting in the sort of pocket just in front of his back four. He picks it up. He's got 5 Celtic players in front of them, right? None of them are pressing him, right? And none of them are marking anybody. So they just sat in front of 5 Dortmund players with the 5 Celtic players in front of them doing nothing. Literally nothing, not affecting the game in any way, which means the back 4 have got 5 Dortmund players in front of them. So can Emre Can, has he got the ability to thread a 20-yard pass through that yawning chasm in midfield to, hang on, how do you spell it? Adeyemi! Oh, yes, here we go again. And yes, Adeyemi gets the ball on the turn and drives towards the centre of the goal. And again, Celtic players are in retreat and Dortmund players are flying forward. It's 4 against 5 eventually, because I think Engels manages to get back. Now, from that situation, Brandt actually looks like he's about to get in to score. Johnson intercepts, and then from the corner, they score their 3rd goal. So, again, it wasn't consequence-free in that sense. And then finally, because it wasn't necessary to beat the Corps any further by this stage, the 36th minute, so it's about 32 minutes of play I've covered here, okay? And by the way, I've not covered in this section, I've not covered any of the individual errors that occurred. This is all about Celtic's basic shape and team play. You've got Schlotterbeck. Now, Schlotterbeck picks the ball up in a very standard midfield, mid of his own half position. He actually completed the most packed passes, had the highest packing score of any player on the pitch. So, you had to bear that in mind, right? He's also right in the centre of the pitch. And suddenly, Engels decides to press him. Now, if you're going to trigger somebody, you don't tend to trigger them when they're stood in the middle of the pitch with lots of time, with the ball under control, and the whole pitch to choose from. 360 degrees can go in any direction. That's a really bad pressing decision. Nobody else presses with him. As he presses Schlotterbeck, there are 6 Celtic players. 6 Celtic players in and around the midfield area, none of whom are pressing anybody, and none of whom are marking anybody. Behind them are 5 Dortmund players and the 4 Celtic defenders. Is this starting to sound familiar? Right? So again, incredibly, because he'd done it all day, all game, and presumably has done it all season, and many seasons prior to this, Schlotterbeck manages to thread a pass through the whole of those 5 randomly assorted green and white shirts into, actually at this point, it was Gittins. And as Gittins manages to control the ball and turn at great pace, then rushes towards the Celtic goal with the defence in retreat and 5 players descending upon the goal. I think I've made the point, right? I mean, this was just an absolute disaster. If you're going to set up a team, right, off the ball, you think about positioning, you think about spacing, you think about where on the field you want to do, but mostly you think about what is it we want to do here? What is it that are... You can't just go to Dortmund and Barcelona and Arsenal and PSG and say, we're going to play our own game and to hell with it, right? And I'm sure Celtic didn't do that. You have to say, right, where are we going to get hurt, right? And as I said to you, where you're going to get hurt against Dortmund is if you give Brandt space to play, if you let their wide players have open field behind some poor fullback that's marking them, if you let them run at you from deep, if you let them overload you. And we basically set up the team that utterly ensured, that if they were competent at passing from the back, and guess what? Schlotterbeck, Kahn, Chan, Gross are really capable of passing out well from the back. We utterly ensured that all of those risks would manifest and that all of those issues would become real over and over and over and over again. And we did nothing to limit the risks, to limit the danger. And the defenders were in an absolutely horrendous situation in most of those scenarios that I've just described there. But this is fundamentally, it's a failure. It's a tactical failure of how to set up a team off the ball, and it was one of the most abysmal tactical failures I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, just before I come to you, James, if I may, Alan, just a couple of other observations. One of the other aspects that got me a little bit was, given what you've described and how long it went on for, I thought perhaps a bit of in-game management or tweaks, changes to how we were playing. But at 7-1 down, last few minutes to go, a couple of minutes to go, we almost get caught again. There was one pass which took out eight Celtic players in the Dortmund half. Guess what? 2 against 2. It was Duran, Veal and Gittins running right through, and they made the wrong decision right at the end. You're like,
83rd minute, 7-1 down.
You're like, we're 7-1 down. Why are we pushing
the same thing?
Keep going, lads. They're going to run out of steam. If we get a bit of injury time here, perhaps
their
get
heads
the
are down,
XG
lads.
going.
Their heads are down. No, you're spot on. It didn't fundamentally change. All that changed, as I say, up to that, I went up to the 36th minute, by which stage, shortly after, it was 4-1. By that stage, it's just game state and stat gathering. It's irrelevant. But we didn't change. We didn't fundamentally change the way we played. They just got fairly bored about doing what they needed to do and did the minimal.
Just the final point from me really was with that first goal as well. What also struck me a little bit was how poor the press was. I know you talked about the press a little bit, Alan, but I felt compared to the last game against Slovan, there wasn't any urgency. And my example for that really was Kyogo ran across, and I've seen Kyogo tearing it up. I mentioned this in the last game against the Rangers. Even near the 75th minute, he's chasing the full length of the park at full pelt. Even at that early stage, he wasn't going full pelt. He was running across, I thought, almost as a gesture. They passed it around. All the space was there in the midfield that you described. I was horrified. The position that I think it was Gittins got the ball on the right in the centre circle. He miscontrols it. He turns, McGregor's nowhere near him, Engels starts to come towards him, and then he just runs in a straight line at full pelt all the way through without a reasonable tackle coming in until the goalkeeper upends him. And I felt the press, if you're going to play that way, you absolutely must have a really... everyone needs to be pressing.
So promise last word from me, because I know I've gone on for a bit, but my point is that if you set up like this in such a abject fashion relative to the strength of your opposition, then and then on top of all of that, you add in bad luck, incredible opposition finishing, and horrendous individual errors. You're not just going to get beat. You're going to get absolutely taken apart, and that all the other things happen too. But I'm not. We can't say we was robbed. I mean, the penalty was incredibly unfortunate, the way the ball ricocheted. The second goal off of Trusty actually blocked the shot. They had one that went through 2 sets of legs. All these things. Adeyemi's shot from nearly outside the edge of the 18-yard box from wide. I mean, come on, who scores that?
Yeah, it was close,
right?
Yeah.
So listen, all that is true. All that is true. But if you set up to fail, then don't be disappointed when these things go wrong for you.
James, cheer us up, James, like Phoenix rising from the ashes. What did you come up with?
I'm a firm believer in gallows humor. I think I've said that before. And when things get horrible, like this kind of game, you have to laugh or else you cry. That's my philosophy. And I had a couple of questions for Alan because I've been very much looking forward to this conversation. To get his insight, because I did rewatch the game. As I say, I don't always rewatch games. Usually the, most European, if not all European games, derbies, and then the select kind of reasonably competitive games against the Hearts or an Aberdeen, that kind of thing. But so when I rewatched this, I wasn't able to ascertain what the game plan was on the press, in the sense that relative to normal, meaning that, the way we've been setting up so far this season, it's, Hatate and Kyogo in the top of the 4-4-2, and they're kind of leading the press. And it was almost to me like we were playing 4-1-4-1, and then kind of sporadically alternating. Like Kuhn was up top sometimes with Kyogo pressing, and then other times it seemed to be Bernardo. Like I couldn't really figure out, it didn't seem as organized or as rigid. And I don't mean that in rigid, as a relative basis. So what did you think? Like, what was the pressing structure? I couldn't figure it out.
No, I don't think. I honestly don't think. I think we tweaked in the sense of, and I think they do. I think and Rogers would say this would be a strength in that to match the opposition. It's not a rigid you go I go, or he's the press leader when he go. We don't do anything until he goes. I don't think it's like that. I think it's more relational in terms of what's happening on the pitch, which is good, right? But I think two things. One is, I think in the early sort of first 10 minutes, there were a few small wins, if I can put it that way. So I think Maeda got his foot on a couple. I think Engels blocked a pass up the line, or Bernardo, or something like that. We had a few small wins. We didn't win the ball back, but we nevertheless kind of irritated them slightly with our press, and that probably gave everybody a little bit of encouragement that this should be continued. But I just think fundamentally it comes down to that. What we marvel at against St Johnstone in terms of ability to close down pace against somebody who's probably going to take 4 touches to control the ball is a world of difference from trying to press somebody like a Schlotterbeck or an Anton, or a Couto or a Ryerson, even right-footed right back playing on the left-hand side. Even he was pretty nifty out. And then you get the ball. There's always a Shan or a Gross to hand who are wonderful technical footballers. So I just think it's simply the case that you're trying to do something which is not going to scale to that level of opposition. I'm not saying you don't press. I'm just saying you need to be really selective about when you do it. And so I don't think it was a failure of strategy in the sense of they picked the wrong. Today's pressing strategy is number B. Right. I don't think it's that. I think it's just the fact that whatever we did, it was bound to fail if you do it all in, as Celtic did, against that level of opposition.
So when I talked about on Tuesday that my central tendency for this game was horrified, and with a lot of variance in potential scenarios, I didn't think a likely scenario was that we were going to lay an egg like this on a tactical basis. I was hoping that their manager would do that, which was why I kind of had some confidence that, and we saw some evidence of that. Like we were able to hit them on the break some. Like there were elements of play here, but even in the first half, which in the utter debacle that it was, there were snippets of play when we were able to really hurt them in transition. But we just weren't set up smartly, I don't think, on the relative strengths and weaknesses of these two teams. And I think they were. I think, again, to their credit, and I'll give you an example, like their press was organized, wasn't crazy. Like they weren't Salzburg blitzkrieging or Midtjylland blitzkrieging, like when we faced them in Ange's first, Champions League qualification challenge, where we were playing a B team. But Midtjylland, again, I'll put this into numbers. Midtjylland had 299 pressure events against us in that game. At this level, most teams, Alan knows that's nuts, right? That's a high press team. Like that's a team that goes crazy front-footed in pressing. At this level in the Champions League, you get around 200 is like a normal level of organized good pressing, because if you go much above that at this level, these guys are good. Like you do that against, you try to press 300 times against Real Madrid, they're going to incinerate you because they're really good on the ball. And it's hard to stay compact and organized when you're flying around that much. So they were organized, they were smart, they were setting traps, but they identified, I'll give them the charitable reading that they identified a potential weakness that I've been worried about, which is when you play Engels and Bernardo in midfield together, neither one of them are necessarily good at getting on the ball and then turning and progressing the ball. And to put that into numbers, Bernardo only received 5 passes in the first half. Al and I have talked about this repeatedly, that his main weakness is ball progression. And if you're going to have a high press, not a balls to the wall high press, but they were positionally in our defensive third, and then setting these traps and basically daring us to try and pass through, and then having really smart pressing triggers. And when you have your 2 attacking 8s in a 4-3-3 in build-up that are effectively useless in build-up, and Bernardo was useless because he wasn't getting open in space to be able to be an option. And Engels was useless because when he got on the ball, he gave it away. So I think he had, I have it written here, he had 19 ball receipts, and this is for the whole game. So again, you have to scale that. Bernardo's was only half a game, but he lost possession 10 times. So if you're receiving the ball 19 times and you lose it 10 times, that's a pretty bad ratio when you're facing a superior opponent. And, for all the criticism that McGregor has gotten, and some of it justifiable, I think, as Alan's talked about positionally, some issues, he was on the ball. He had 47 ball receipts because that's what McGregor does. Like, that's his value in buildup. He only lost possession 5 times. Okay, some of them were really bad and in bad positions, but it gives you an issue, some scale of proportionality here, and why McGregor's position at the fulcrum of buildup is important, is because you have to have somebody that's going to actually build up play. And I mean, this was the train wreck, is because Taylor had an awful day on the ball. Bernardo was a ghost. Engels was terrible on the ball and wasn't all that available. And Johnson had a terrible day on the ball. And again, this goes back to Alan's point. We talk about this all the time about toxic combinations, and when you have systemic failure like this, everybody looks like crap. And that goes back to this issue. This is the flip side. When we talk about endlessly, and people get sick of hearing it, about how horribly the opposition set up and the cascading impacts and how it makes it easy for us in order to look better than we, otherwise would. This was bizarro world for us. Like, week to week, the vast majority of the time, we're laughing at the opposition because they've set up like morons. And yes, we played well, but damn, they made it easy for us. Well, this was the opposite of that. Yeah, and actually, to Alan's point, we'll get into this a little bit. Dortmund actually didn't play all that well. They had really high-powered athletes and really good players that played against a team that was just making life super easy on them. So that's kind of the summary is how I would characterize it. And the horrified, I think, was on display, which was, some of their players are just insanely talented. And fortunately for us, they didn't make a lot of good decisions during the game, because if they had the finishing, that's when you could have been a horror show of, like, name a number, like total humiliation, embarrassment, record-setting kind of defeat. So the good news is they had an off day in some respects, and because otherwise it could have been even worse.
Yeah, I think that's very fair, James. And just to pick up something that both of you alluded to about, I suppose, the physicality in the Celtic team. I watched Dortmund playing Stuttgart, and the Stuttgart press was insane. It was absolutely fantastic. So that as soon as guys like Brandt had an opportunity, and they weren't able to turn. And the same with your Adeyemis, the danger men. They just were struggling to actually turn, and the press further up meant that the ball was going back a lot to the Dortmund fullbacks and central defenders who can still move it around, but not like Gross, not like Chan, and that really nullified Dortmund to a great extent. Physically, I don't know if we were capable of that. We've talked about the well-known speed of guys like Adeyemi. I think in the last international break, he scored 4 goals in 2 games. I think, under 21 level for Germany, and he's been tearing it up in the Bundesliga. Putting him, leaving him 1-on-1 with someone like Taylor, he's never going to have the pace. Not many people would. But Alan, you were talking about your worst nightmare being we were 1-on-1 with these guys. They were 3 and 4 on 2 at times, just kind of pouring forward. It was absolutely insane. What do you think about, if you like, Celtic physically? You mentioned, we were looking at somebody like Engels and think, well, he's a big specimen. He'll, help us hopefully spending that amount of money in Europe. But when you look at that level, I think we look quite a small team and not a particularly athletic team.
Well, again, I'm not going to draw conclusions about that type of issue from this game, because, again, the fundamental issue here was one of the Celtic's out-of-ball shape. And spacing, organisation, overall, everything was utterly wrong and misguided. And therefore, the fact whether Engels is actually big, strong, and athletic and get box to box, it was a moot point in this sort of game. It is an interesting learning the extent to which Bernardo was essentially nullified entirely from that game, such that he had to be substituted. I mean, he basically just got. I don't know whether they were picking on him. Maybe they were, but he just got. The kid had no chance. He just had no chance.
He gave away possession quite a lot, though, as well, didn't he?
Well, he never got the ball. When he did get the ball, like you say, it didn't. It got turned over very quickly. Greg Taylor just had I don't know what was happening with Greg Taylor, but if you look at any given time when the ball is with Dortmund as to what the Celtic shape was, and as I say, you had this weird situation where you had 5 Celtic players not doing anything, and then 5 Dortmund players stood behind them. This happened over and over and over again. Is that where's Greg Taylor? Why is he running in that? Where's he going? And I guess if I had to play against Adeyemi for 45 minutes, I'd probably you'd be running in the opposite direction as well, to be fair. But he had a very odd one in that respect. But what came to my mind, and this was really a comment that I kind of aimed at myself in terms of, because if you'd watched Dortmund, especially, and you watched the Stuttgart game, and I watched the Bochum game, and they weren't just awful in terms of, like, say, we're talking about we haven't even touched about on the ball here. We're just talked about off the ball. Against Bochum, Dortmund were horrendous in every aspect of the game, like almost comically bad, like almost like. How did this team ever win a football match? They must be in the relegation zone. They're that bad. But I always remember what Ange Postecoglou said, and I think we're learning. There was a bit of the sort of carnival showman about young Ange. But one of the things that he did say, which always sticks with me, is he always used to say, "We prepare the team to play the best version of the opponents that they can possibly." That we can possibly throw at us, right? And I thought that's a cracking attitude. So, and in my mind, I'd been fixating on what are the opportunities here for Celtic? How can Celtic get something from this game? And it seemed to me to be plenty of them. There was plenty of risks, and I covered those as well. But there seemed to be quite a few opportunities. But it did feel to me as if Celtic prepared in a way that didn't account for Dortmund being the best version of themselves on the day. And boy, they played really well. They played and it's certainly in relation to how they've played in previous matches this season. It's almost like on a big, Champions League night with 82,000 people in the stadium, they kind of turned up. It's like shock, and they did. And that's the version of Dortmund that you need to be prepared to play. You need to be prepared for Schlotterbeck and Anton being highly press resistant and being able to kind of work their way out of dodgy situations. You need to be prepared for Shan and Gross, one of them bombing on, one of them pinging Hollywood balls all day long. You need to be prepared for the front four just to run at you with electric pace and relentlessly over and over again. You need to be prepared for Brandt being just the proper old school number 10, always wandering around the pitch, always trying to get on the ball, always looking to feed players through. You need to prepare yourself for that version of Dortmund. And if that is how Celtic set up to play that version of Dortmund, then I'm speechless. I know I've not been speechless, but I'm now going to be speechless.
Well, one thing I would just pick up there as well, Alan, I think you both alluded to this earlier, was that, certainly it wasn't probably the best version of Dortmund. And after the match, Callum McGregor was being interviewed, and it was later echoed by Brendan Rodgers, saying every little mistake was punished. And it absolutely wasn't, because that would have been well into double figures if they had have really punished every mistake. We could be going on to midnight talking about it. So thankfully, they didn't punish every little mistake.
So one of the ways that we can break down the difference between scoreline and kind of assigning performance data, obviously people talk about XG, and that's been prominent, remains prominent, and is important. But from a game like Tuesday's can also be pretty misleading. And this is also why Alan and I talk about things like game state, understanding models, the qualitative aspect of some of this. So, for example, not only our goal, but both of our big chances that really buttressed that XG amount had some positive luck, right? So you had was in Khan, the midfielder, their captain, almost had a brain fart on what was a pretty good cross from Engel. That was probably his highlight of the one thing he did really well on the day, was a nice cross in. But he had a brain fart and kind of just, and then, basically half-ass heads it right into Maeda. Okay, so that qualifies as a shot. But is it real? You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of a guy that accidentally ran into a ball and it goes in, and that's a huge high XG amount. So, this is why we always talk about single game XG being an issue. The second one, obviously, Ida's header was like a double deflection that happened to bounce right into his pathway. And, keeper makes a nice play. He does a good job. Like, that's a tough thing when you get a double deflection, and to have the reflexes to do what he did was actually really good. But that's a huge high XG value. But, when you talk about like the level of play, the amount of attacking that we did, you had a manifestation of some of the issues I've talked about and worried about, like Kuhn's decision-making on the ball. That kind of manifested here. We saw that. But the flip side of that, and there's ways to break this down. So both teams were actually bad at decision-making on the ball. Like, when do you pass versus when do you shoot? And that was epitomized by Kuhn, for example, the one time, but also Gross. Alan referenced he was in on one-on-one on goal and then tries to play a cute, or was it Brandt? That was Gross, I think.
Chan did it as well, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, where he had
so many.
There were so many, yeah.
Yeah, he tapped it over, and it was behind Gyasi, and it could have been a tap in if it was well played, or he could have just shot because he had a wide open shot on the goal. So there's ways to kind of tease that out, and that if you tease that out and kind of add it back onto the XG, they would have been up over like well into the threes.
Just what you were saying there about Adeyemi, I have rarely, if ever, felt such a sense of relief as when that young man went down holding hold his leg with that injury, his hamstring. And I thought, yes, it's time for you to rest up, young man. It's time to go off.
But that's another. So this again goes back to the tactical issues that we've been chronicling, and Gallo Humor's laughing at.
Yeah,
is the value of their carrying of the ball in space was crazy, like to a degree that is just an outlier. When I look across games, and in domestically, for example, we typically do very well with that because we have the better players, and defensive alignments aren't always the greatest, and they tend to be more, in their own half, not caught in transition all of that much. So our guys do carry the ball a lot in space. But, I have not seen a game where a possession-based model ticked where they did for just him and Gittins. Yeah. I mean, just Adeyemi and Gittin, like on a XG basis, was worth almost 2 goals just from running with the ball. That's insane. But again, that speaks to how much it was a jailbreak. and most of that was within, as Alan rightfully chronicled, in 38 minutes.
And if only you could have foreseen that was going to happen.
Yeah, and just with Adeyemi, I've never seen anybody so disappointed at coming off, because he was hungry for more. And they brought on Duranville, who's a good player, but I say Adeyemi was just so fantastic. He was just causing havoc. You could sense his bitter disappointment going off.
So I just wanted to build on what James has said in terms of, emphasising that, again, if you go down the road of sort of lazy narrative, which is that, oh, look at you with all your money, you beat St Johnstone 6-0 one day, you lose to Dortmund 7-1 the next. That is, again, it's a false analogy, right? That wasn't why the game was what it was. So I looked at about 45 matches. The games that some of the games James referenced there, the games that Celtic have lost by 5, 6, 7, of which there is now a growing list of about 7 of those, and then going back to 2017, a list of about 37 matches where Celtic have scored at least 5 goals domestically. 5, 6, 7s up to 9, in fact, against Dundee United, and to try and characterise what do they look like, what does a shellacking look like, and this in many ways did not resemble one of those. So some of the key areas where it didn't resemble is, generally speaking, in those very one-sided matches, the team that wins has on average, this is an average possession of 70%. Dortmund had 52%. One of the most interesting ones, I think, that speaks volumes about this game is that Dortmund had a pack recovery score. So this is where Celtic turned the ball over, of 151, right? Now, the average by opponents who get hammered is only 87. Right, so what does that mean? It means we helped them a lot. It wasn't as if, their press was, as James said, some of it might be down to an effective press, but the only other number that comes close to that was, weirdly enough, but actually makes sense, was a couple of weeks ago, Slovan Bratislava, who had a sort of a pack recovery score. We had a pack recovery score of 200 against them, and the reason I think for that was because they came to Celtic Park. Now, they come to Celtic Park in a normal standard six team group, and this was their away game, and we knew that they had us at home, and we had to play another couple of teams. I think they'd have set up very differently, but because they knew we were the lowest ranked team, and therefore probably the worst team that they were likely to face in the whole of the 8 matches, they had to kind of have a go. And it was as misguided, that thinking was as misguided as Celtic going to Dortmund and thinking they could have a go. And it manifests itself in that number. And that's very out of step with what these hammerings, the underlying data. Another one is, again, just the number of times that Dortmund lost the ball in Celtic's defensive third. It was only 24. So the average is about 38. So what does that mean? It means they weren't exactly, camped in our half. They weren't exactly throwing crosses into the box every 2 seconds. They weren't exactly, wave after wave of attack. And again, to sort of highlight and really sort of hammer home the point, I mean, the XG is a killer as well. But the other slightly dull stat, which has some interest in this occasion, is how many times did we force Dortmund to win the ball back in their own defensive third? Now, again, you go through all these hammerings. The average is about 9, but only on 4 occasions did they even have to bother winning the ball back in their own defensive third. That's how ineffective Celtic were as a whole. So, I'm not saying that Celtic couldn't have lost by 6 goals had they set up in a cohesive way. They may well have done. But given how Dortmund played, the evidence of the performance that they put in, I posit that had Celtic set up mid-block, looking to hit early balls, not looking to pass through Engels and Bernardo. Everybody knows that, we sit in, and when the moment is right, we fucking go. And we send the 3 forwards flying and we put long balls in behind them. And when we don't have the ball, we sit in a compact mid-block. If we'd done that, I'm given the Dortmund performance, I'm pretty confident we wouldn't have lost anything like. I'm not saying we'd have won, but it would never have been the hammering. It would never have been anything like the hammering that it was. So, anyway, I think we're probably gilding that particularly, Lily, and I'm sure we'd all much rather talk about Ross County or something else.
Yeah, just one thing before we move on to Ross County, if you don't mind, Alan, because just to pick up on what you said, I think what disappointed me a little bit was, we spent the whole time playing these little short passes and ineffectively, sometimes in dangerous areas. And there was one moment in the first half when I think the score was, I think we were 2-1 down at the time. Kyogo made a fantastic run and was screaming for the ball. And Callum McGregor looked up and decided to play another short pass across, another one, and then he put the ball straight out of play, and he then acknowledged Kyogo, actually say sorry, and it was that kind of lack of adventure at times. And before the match, as I said, that was where we really could hurt them. We didn't really use Kyogo and his pace, and if nothing more than trying to relieve some of the pressure on us, because we just kept losing the ball with these short passes and didn't seem to get anywhere. But as you say, unless James has got anything to add.
So one of the risks, I think, coming out of this, obviously fan overreaction and supporter overreaction is an acute issue. It's easy to overreact, understandably, with this debacle of a performance. But I think a more human risk that could be problematic would be if Rodgers kind of reacts in a negative way to this. And what I mean by that is, I think the kind of flailing about that you've seen in the response amongst the support is to a degree dissonance driven. We talked about on Tuesday about people kind of getting over their skis, so to speak, a little irrationally exuberant in their optimism heading into this game. And I think there was a crystallization of assessment of this team and how well we've been playing. And then, kind of anchoring cognitively as the image of this team. And then bam, reality hit it on in Dortmund, and that triggers dissonance where people start flailing off into their priors, right? So the people that think Callum McGregor shouldn't be playing defensive midfield, that's the reason that we're a debacle. The people that don't like Brendan Rodgers, for whatever reason, like there's still a latent legacy issue there that's been papered over because of how well we've been playing, and we won the league and the double last season. But, there's still, so everyone kind of falls back on confirmation bias. And that includes Rodgers, right? He's a human being. We're all suffer from these cognitive traps and these tricks that we play on ourselves. So my fear would be if, he gets dissonance triggered and doesn't learn potential lessons from this game, that this wasn't like the PSG or the Barcelona games that he experienced and we experienced collectively as a club. So how he goes about learning from this, drawing proper lessons, and I don't mean that in like a condescending way. I mean that in a sense of like we're the all being authority on this stuff. But generally, it's if he went into this game to the degree where he thought that going toe to toe and having a go with Dortmund made sense, there is a risk that dissonance gets triggered, and then he falls back on priors and has confirmation bias and all these things that we all fall victim to. And that's how like bad decision making gets repeated over and over again. So that would be, my main concern coming out of this is, kind of just as a human being, how Rodgers grounds himself and moves forward for the rest of the Champions League. Now, with that, I'll say that one of the weird things, and the last thing I say on the game, is when I rewatched the game, I was surprised at what my assessment of our center backs was. When I watched the game live, I was like, gee, it's like everything else. It's like, this is a train wreck. Like these guys all throw them all in the bin. Right. And I was actually surprised. And you see I would say it's been skewed towards Trusty, as far as like the real venom. And I did a benchmarking report on a new Substack, going through my exercise, and wasn't particularly flattering on him relative to his kind of on-ball control and some other aspects of him. But, again, this guy got thrown in at right center back against Dortmund in a train wreck side, set up horribly tactically with jailbreaks running at him constantly. That's important context. Within that context, I actually don't think he played that bad. What do you guys think?
Alan, over to you.
Yeah, exactly the same, really. I'm actually baffled. It started after the Falkirk game. And I watched that, obviously, did all the usual analysis, and, he was okay. The team weren't great. Again, 8 changes. I think Rodgers covered that quite well. And last night, I mean, even, again, I wouldn't hold this as being gospel, but, StatsBomb essentially has them as their on-ball value man of the match from a Celtic perspective, quite easily so, actually, Trusty. Mainly to do with his... with his defensive action, OBV was incredibly high. It's 62. I mean, to give you some context, 0.62. To give you some context, Daizen Maeda was next highest at 0.07. And in fact, the highest defensive action OBV in the Dortmund side, clearly he didn't have to do much defending, was 0.05. So 0.62 defensive action OBV is huge in StatsBomb's model. And he was easily their man. When I was finished watching the game, he was my man of the match, right? Why? Because he didn't give any turnovers. He had 100%. He had 100% pass completion rate. There was no obvious individual errors. He was positionally. I mean, I talked about him winning a header 20 yards inside their half in the right back position. I don't put that on him. That's a tactical decision. He was following orders to do that. Scales did exactly the same on occasions. And in fact, the two centre backs in general. Scales had a few of his normal turnovers, which made me could have sort of punt him into second place a little bit. And, and Hatate came on, I think was bright, actually started to try and pass the ball forward. I thought he would be up there in sort of third place. But Trusty, for me, was quite a clear man of the match. Now, I've had comments in my timeline saying, "Oh, it's because he lacks pace." I was like, "Are you serious?" I mean, he literally matched Adeyemi, who's possibly the quickest player, one of the top 10 quickest players in world football, right? I might be exaggerating. It was certainly at the highest level I'm talking. He did actually match him, and it's pretty unfortunate for him that Adeyemi's shot cannoned off his foot, that he managed to get some kind of block in, and it flew into the top corner. I don't remember that many other real kind of errors. I think he generally performed competently, which in the context of the Celtic performance, competent, it was like right up there. and there was nothing in the data that was alarming me. I mean, I think he's probably dual win rate. It wasn't particularly high, but then he didn't really engage in that many duels in all honesty. There weren't hardly any duels in the game. I mean, that's how terrible Celtic were.
We weren't close enough.
Yeah, when you're not marking anybody and you're not pressing anybody, you're not going to get involved in many duels, frankly. So anyway, I think my observation on Trusty is, for God's sake, whoa, come on, give the guy a chance. And B, I would actually go further and say, on the evidence that I've seen, I think he looks solid enough. Now, whether he will be good enough for Celtic in the long term, how he pans out in Champions League games, we don't know. But I certainly am miles away from going down this critical route that some seem to have taken after his 2 showings.
I think that was a really interesting point you made using the stats there, Alan, because I suppose from the eye test point of view, watching the game, initially, my thoughts were that Scales had made an awful lot of pretty important interceptions, even just getting his toe to the ball or cutting the ball out and getting his head to the ball, which could have led to really dangerous moves by Dortmund. I agree with...
Sorry. So Martin, sorry to jump in. So I think with the stats bomb on ball value thing, there's a world of difference, right, reflected in the model between the type of defending I think Scales does excel at and did excel at on the night, whereby you get your head and you get something on it, and the ball then flies away God knows where. They pick it up and put a cross into the box. They would score that very differently to, for example, if you think back to the first half, where I think it was Gittins was powering down the wing and Trusty matched him pace for pace, got a foot in, recovered the ball, passed it forward. Those are two very different scenarios. I think that's probably what I think. I mean, James, you probably know more
yeah,
about it.
I think proximity to goal is also important, meaning that if a defensive action at the 18 that prevents a shot, for example, is going to be much higher in their model than Scales diving in and tackling at around the midway line and recycling possession. Right, so those actions just in the model, and again, it comes down to understanding how the model is built. And you think about it commonsensically through the lens of XG, the threat as a defender is more so towards your own goal, and you're going to get the benefit of being better defensively in that proximity.
No, I was just about to say, I was also, like you guys, a bit surprised by the vitriol directed towards him. And I can only put it down to he's not Cameron Carter-Vickers. And there was a bit of a disappointment that he didn't play. James, you mentioned already, the guy was playing on the right, he's left-footed. So he'd probably be more comfortable in the Scales position, one would presume. I didn't think he did an awful lot wrong. I didn't think he had a great game, but, given some of the criticism, I didn't think it was justified from what I saw. I thought he was pretty tidy in possession and so forth. And even towards the end, he had a nice move up the wing. He clipped it forward to Adamida, who ran through in goal before being tackled. So I would absolutely agree with you guys there. I think I'll be delighted to shut down the Dortmund discussion now. Other than to say, as I shared with James prior to you coming on, Alan, I did manage to get 41 on Maeda to score. So, not a complete disaster.
Just to say that he didn't even have a shot, I think that's pretty remarkable.
I knew his running power. He was always waiting for a mistake. Having watched many Dortmund matches this season, I know they're prone to those sort of errors, so I did allow for that.
You see, I cannot convey how my sort of obsessive compulsiveness was triggered by that goal, in the sense that in my shot spreadsheet, I have to say, was it left foot, right foot, or header? And if I can hit him somewhere in his body, I don't have a value for that. I don't have rib 7 or whatever.
I can see you've now taken a Ginham. You'll be like Laura.
No, I've just had a data management crisis of confidence. I don't have the taxonomy to deal with these sort of shots at goal.
That's how football evolves, Alan. You've got to build this into any models.
I think what you're saying is, Martin, it's time to retire. I'd accept that.
No, absolutely not, Alan. Just before we go on to consider Ross County, I'll just share something with you. I was recognised by one of our subscribers, and it was actually very pleasant. No. It was very pleasant. So a shout out to Snap 1888. I hope the house move went well, Scott. And I hope that you're on the Substack, which Alan will be mentioning at the end. But we'll move on, as always, to league business, a chance to recover, play Ross County and Dingwall on Sunday. On the face of it, it looks a good game to play. I mean, naturally, one would hope for a home match when you've been away in Europe, but this season they've had 1 win and 7. they tend to play, I would say, long balls. They attack down the right mainly, so that's always been interesting for us in the left. They tend to shoot from distance a lot. In terms of their star men, from what I've seen of them, an Irish chap who's soon to be Northern Irish, I think he's looking at playing for Northern Ireland and changing his nationality in that sense, or taking the option rather. Ronan Hale, he looked very impressive, especially there was a 3-3 draw against the mighty St Johnstone, but he did play very well, I thought, in that game. And he's got 6 goals this season, including the League Cup, 3 yellow cards. He puts himself about. Jordan White as well, we'll remember, the big kind of totem up front. He's partnering a big centre forward, very good in the air. So again, it'll be interesting to see how our central defence copes there. And they'd also signed a defender, a guy called Wright, I think, from Stockport. He's got a couple of goals as well. But in the great scheme of things, they're not a great possession team. Defensively, they're not great down the wings. I would expect a fairly comfortable win, even though we may still be a little bit shell-shocked. What do we think, guys?
One would hope so.
Yeah.
But that's, they're generally speaking in the neighborhood of St. Johnstone so far this season from a statistical perspective. The nuance there is, I would say that they've been better on set pieces, both kind of like if you look at the spread between attacking and defending, they've been pretty good in set pieces, actually. And you think, given their physical profile, guys like Jordan White, they've got some aerial threats, so they've been decent in that regard. They're relatively passive defensively, so that's different than St. Johnstone, where I kind of mocked their this weird hybrid of trying to press more while not necessarily being all that organized and good at it. Ross County's been, more like 3-5-2 and, kind of the traditional, as I talked about, like the St. Mirren model of playing narrow 3-5-2. So I would expect them to kind of park the bus more traditionally, play more long ball, and try to win on set pieces or, get a result that way. That lends its, this could be another one of these tests, right? So I talked about, some of these tests I've been worried about given the composition of our squad. We just saw one of them relative to smart pressing and how our build-up would weather that relative to the composition of the midfield, which I think, was compounded by the decision to go with Bernardo over Hatate. But this one I've been waiting for, an organized, narrow, bunkered, bus parking opponent to see where we're at from a creativity perspective against that. And we just haven't, I find it remarkable that we haven't faced that yet this season, given how well we've been playing, that we haven't seen that kind of traditional thing that we've historically seen a lot, which is that kind of bunkering. So, hard to tell whether they'll go man to man and that kind of thing to open up space and, chasing our guys around the touch line and allowing space centrally for us, which obviously we're hoping for, or whether they'll have a more kind of compact and zonal philosophy. But yeah, I mean, again, they're not good. They haven't been good. And it should be one of those where it's relatively comfortable. And we need it. That if we drop points in this kind of fixture, then you're talking about all of a sudden, you go quick from 72 hours ago, we're going to win the Champions League. I say that tongue in cheek, but way over the skis, overconfidence going into Dortmund to Bedlam potentially within a week if we drop points in Dingwall. So, I mean, that's obviously not the base case. I wouldn't expect it, but crazier things have happened coming out of a crazy European fixture on the road to Dingwall. So,
Alan, have you anything to add?
Yeah, listen, I mean, aside from when they went to Ibrox and played 4-4-2, and again, that really did smack of their opponents.
6-0, wasn't it?
Their opponents that day had been struggling clearly, and whether they felt they could have a go. which I think is what they did, and just absolutely were just. It was a bit like it was.
That reminds me of something, doesn't it?
I know. I'm trying to think. I just
Who would do that?
What sort of maniac would do something like that?
I know. Whenever I close my eyes, I just see Adeyemi running at Taylor. I need to open my eyes, back in the room. Okay, we're back. So apart from their, the day that they did that, they've actually been every one of their games has been either a draw or one goal. In fact, they beat Dundee by 2 goals, which not many teams have done this season. In terms of Dundee, have been relatively good this season. I did watch their game at home to Aberdeen, and to say they were at home, they set out to frustrate, and they did for 90 minutes. They frustrated Aberdeen pretty effectively, and Aberdeen, I think, nicked it with a late goal. It wasn't pretty. I think they play after Dundee United, which is not traditionally. Dundee United to me is in my mind, growing up, Dundee United's a hotbed of good football. But Dundee United are the most long ballish team in the league, and Ross County are second actually. So their XG differential is not too bad in terms of the gap really between, I would say, even. I think Hearts eventually will sort themselves out if they get a good manager. But the gap, honestly, and Aberdeen, we'll see if they keep going, but they've got a lot of momentum at the moment, confidence, obviously. But I think the rest, there's really not a lot between them at all, which is why if you look at the league table, there's a lot of draws at the moment, because there really isn't too much between those teams. So this just, Ross County may be near the bottom. As James says, their data suggests they're more of a St Johnstone than they are a Hibs, let's say, if I put it that way. It doesn't mean to say it couldn't be sticky, right? Because as I say, I think they found a template, especially against Aberdeen, where they were able to frustrate for long periods. They've got a draw at Tynecastle last week. They're unbeaten in 3 league games. Actually,
they were unlucky not to win that at Tynecastle. It was a very late goal, wasn't it?
It was.
Shankland broke his duck.
Yes. He finally roused himself to move to meet the ball somewhere on the pitch. So there'll be 3-5-2 stroke 5-3-2. We'll have those 5 big, stout-hearted lads, no doubt, lined across the 18-yard box, and there'll be a lot of long balls. And on what is, I think, one of the shortest pitches in the league, it's actually as wide as Celtic Park, believe it or not. And I know the camera angle's so shallow there, people might be surprised by that, but the actual length of it is a good 5 yards shorter than Celtic Park. So they'll no doubt be able to get some distance on those long goals. But listen, there's nothing new here that we haven't faced before. But obviously, I think it will be an interesting test to see how Celtic get, having been on this 21 match unbeaten run, the way they've started the season. Is how do they respond? I'm sure they'll respond well, but it could be a pretty scruffy 1-0.
Now, an awful lot of our viewers and listeners would be tremendously disappointed if we didn't have Poetry Corner. It's not just data analysis. There's so much culture in this show.
Did you miss my Edgar Allan Poe earlier?
You're up for this, I think, James, because we were talking about, is it going to be Sylvia Plath? Is it going to be Not Waving but Drowning? Is it going to be The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot? Edgar Allan Poe had a mention, James.
No, I'm going to be an American Homer, and I went with Rita Dove, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner. So we got, if we're going to go American, we got to go top shelf. And I thought this one was apropos. I like to my art to be multifaceted, to have different ways to apply it. And dimensionality. So the poem's called Dawn Revisited, because I think every year it's like we enter a new dawn with European football. And we think, this madness that we're going to actually do well this season finally. And we last year was a little weird because we went into a kind of pessimistic because of all the injuries and such. But most other seasons we wake up as if it's dawn and a new day and it's going to be terrific. And then things kind of tumble. So I Dawn Revisited by Rita Dove. It goes, dawn has come and I sit on the porch drinking my tea as the world, heated by the sun, begins its slow tumbled toward another night. And this week was a beginning of our slow tumble towards another night in Europe, unfortunately, where optimism was not rewarded. But the multidimensionality is you can flip this on its head. And maybe actually this was the dawn is just coming now. And we're going to wake up and we're going to shift, and that we're going to reformulate how we're going to go into Bergamo and go in smartly and with awareness, and that's the new dawn, is that we're going to actually go to a new phase in Europe of being smart and playing well. So that I'm going to take the optimistic interpretation.
I love that, James. You know, there's a golden sky in the sweet silver song of the lark. Yes, it's all there for us, my friend. You've cheered me up already.
Well, God love you then, because I need it.
I'm very easily pleased.
You're more resilient than I.
Alan, just before we close out, I wondered if you'd like to mention the Substack and any further developments.
Yeah, and I'm aware that, you know, maybe the word Substack hasn't necessarily entered everybody's consciousness. So essentially, it's just a hosting platform for content. Really, very simple. Okay, so what we've done is we've built. It's a website, for God's sake. It's just a website with content on it, right? On a platform called Substack. But if you put into your browser Substack, the Huddle breakdown, you'll get beautifully crafted. I say that because it wasn't me that designed it. Content portal where you'll be able to get written work from myself and James, all of the podcasts, all of the Celtic by Number stuff, the Yorkshire Whistler stuff, James's benchmarking reports. There's going to be other exciting content on there. We've started to do sort of one-off specials around explaining some of the concepts behind some of the analytical pieces that we often reference. There's a community chat, which is now up and active. It was, I think, as James actually described it very beautifully. For those of us like James and I who aren't part of a Celtic supporters club, who live so far away, we don't get to see games very often. To have something to go, even if it's virtual, where you can have that sort of camaraderie with fellow Celtic fans, I think is a key part of what this offering is. So it's a lot of content. It's a community. As I teed up before, there will be a subscription element to it. We don't get to have all this lovely bells and whistles and beautiful looking stuff. It doesn't all come free. We've got to sort of meet some costs on all of that. But our regular Tuesday podcast plus the Yorkshire Whistler content will be free to air if that's the choice that you make. So don't worry in that regard. But if you do really like this level of detail that we've gone into tonight, you do like really getting into the nuts, the bolts, the post-shot XG, not just your XG, but your post-shot XG. If you love that level of granularity, then please help support us, subscribe, and we'll hopefully give you all the content that you could possibly wish in that regard. And thank you ever so much, everyone, for your support.
Thanks very much, Alan. If I could just thank yourself and James again. I hope to all you listening or watching, this has been therapeutic rather than triggering. And thanks for joining us. Hopefully you'll join us again this time next week. And remember, as Alan said, there's the Tuesday programme with Laura, James and Alan. They'll be looking at the Ross County Ross County match, among other things as well. So thanks again for joining us. And remember to like and subscribe and leave any comments as well. Thanks again.